Welcome, everyone. I am Laura Weaver from Campus Compact, and I am excited to have everyone join us for our session today on fostering curious disagreement with the Viewpoint Project. We have Shira Hoffer and Jason Vadnos joining us. I am quite excited to hear from both of them today. If you joined us at Compact 25, Shira was a part of one of our panels and then had a great roundtable session. So I know you are in for a treat today. If you are just coming into the session, please put your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. But without further ado, I want to hand this over to Shira, who is going to go ahead and get us started. Thanks for joining us, Shira and Jason.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's so exciting to see all of you here. I'll give you two warnings. One is my house is shaking because they are replacing the water mains outside. So far, the lights have only gone out once, so I'm really hoping it won't happen again, but if it does, that's why. And the second is I have a 19-year-old cat who is very needy, and he sometimes starts screaming. So if you hear kind of a screaming in the background, it's probably my cat, and it's just fine. So we can say hi to him if that comes up. But my name is Shira Hoffer. I'm the founding executive director of the Viewpoints Project. I graduated from Harvard in May and am now working in this space full time. Jason, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself too before we get started.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to see everyone here. Super excited for today's session. My name is Jason. I am currently a junior at Vanderbilt University and work with Shira at the Viewpoints Project as a program associate and trainer. So excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So the plan is that we'll tell you a little bit about the Viewpoints Project, and then we'll go over the agenda in a moment. So the Viewpoints Project is a nonprofit focused on fostering curious disagreement in education. We offer a fellowship for college students where we partner with universities to bring the skills of curious disagreement into areas of the population that may not otherwise be opting into those programs. People who may not be so excited about mandatory programs, we're trying to walk that line. We'll tell you more about that fellowship at the end, but definitely keep it in mind if you're on a campus and that sounds exciting to you. We also do some middle and high school work, and we'll do custom programs for organizations or companies or places of worship that are looking also to create this culture where impassioned and respectful disagreement can thrive in dynamic discussions featuring curiosity and open-mindedness, and where participants are treated with dignity. So you can see our inaugural group of fellows up in the right-hand corner of the screen. We're partnering with Dartmouth and Elon this year to pilot this college student fellowship, and we're looking to bring in schools for next year. So more on that in a little bit. And the agenda for today is threefold. So we're going to talk a little bit about the science behind curious disagreement. Why is it important? And in particular, why is it really hard? And we're going to learn why it's hard in order to learn how we can make it easier. So that's going to be a good grounding for the work. We're then going to teach you some skills around active listening, intentional questioning, and facilitation, skills that you'll be able to use, that you'll hopefully be able to foster in your students, and you'll come away with a bit of a toolkit for this type of engagement. And then we're going to do some interactive scene work. We're going to do it. Jason and I will do a little bit of modeling, and then you'll have a chance to go into breakout rooms and role play some scenarios. So stay tuned for that. Get excited to spend some time chatting with your colleagues as well. So with that, I think we'll get started with the science.
Thank you, Shira. So first off here with the science section, we're going to ask the question, why do we disagree? Why do we need to disagree? And why is this such an important part of life? So really disagreement is very critical because it's just part of human nature. Conflict is part of our nature. It is part of life and is very critical, really, for democracy in general. Disagreement enables us to find the best solutions to critical problems, strengthens our ability to authentically collaborate with one another, and it promotes our critical thinking skills. And Shira, if you would mind advancing the slide, that would be great, please.
Sure. Jason, did we want to ask
Oh,
folks
good.
before we go to the next slide on the next one to share in the chat why they, yeah.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. And Laura, thanks for managing on the tech side. Yeah, I think if you want to put into the chat, everyone who's here, maybe just a thought or two on why you think disagreement is important, why you think disagreement is critical for our democracy, that would be great. But as you all can see on this slide here, the Viewpoints Project, we believe that disagreement is critical to innovation, to challenging our inherent biases, and also to expanding and clarifying our understanding of the world around us. And of course, in a diverse, pluralistic democracy like ours, disagreement is critical to solving the most pressing problems that our world is facing. Disagreeing in a way that enables us to improve ourselves and our communities is a superpower and a necessity for our lives. But then sort of our next question is, how does curiosity connect to disagreement? So as you guys are continuing to sort of plug into the chat thoughts on why disagreement happens and why we need it, I would also love to hear, why do we need to be curious? Why do we think curiosity is so critical to our world? And I'm seeing here in the chat, we have thoughts on disagreement enabling us to question our assumptions, understanding the viewpoints and lived experiences of others, thinking about the diversity of thought, and figuring out how to do disagreement well is critical to navigating life. We also see making sure people are heard, exercising our voice. These are all great. Curious mindsets help us get unstuck from our own perspectives, certainly resonating with you all on this front. So continue to put in thoughts on disagreement and curiosity in the chat. But I think we would like to sort of explain from our perspective why we think curiosity is so important, and really bring to the forefront why curiosity is central to what we do here at the Viewpoints Project. So, why do we need to be curious? Why is being curious a great thing, especially when we're disagreeing? Well, one of the best things about curiosity is that it places us in a positive affective state. Namely, when we're curious, we are also more primed to experience positive emotions like joy and enthusiasm and the sense of wonder. We like being curious about the world. We want to be curious about the world, and it makes us more happy and more fulfilled when we're curious rather than frustrated or angry. And the more curious we are, the less likely we are to be irritated or sort of negatively impacted by confusion. If we approach questions or disagreement with curiosity, we can do so in a joyful way rather than a frustrating way. Moreover, embracing curiosity provides us with a host of other psychological benefits, from better concentration to greater creativity. And by default, being curious demands that we also be more open-minded and seek to learn more about the world around us. This sort of curious mindset also directly combats the social and political polarization that our country and our society is experiencing, as I'm sure all of you know. And I think many of you are agreeing with these points in the chat, how disagreement can open a pathway to curiosity. Curiosity shows others that we are interested in them and their unique perspectives. Curiosity is critical to leadership, learning, and community impact. Certainly agree with you all on these fronts. And with the Viewpoints Project, really believe that curiosity is central to disagreeing well. And I'll hand it off to Shira for our next section here.
Great. Yeah, I want to highlight one in the chat that Deborah Drago says. She says, curiosity shows, oh no, I lost it. Curiosity shows others that we are interested in them. I think that's a really important one that maybe I'll go back and add to the slides right after we finish. That there's the benefit to the person who's curious, but there's the benefit to the conversation as well. That people love being asked questions about themselves. Everybody's favorite topic to talk about is themselves. And so curiosity can make conversations feel more dynamic in that way. Also, if you're interested in more of this research, we can share. It's on our website, but we did basically a literature review on curiosity and disagreement from a psychology perspective, and that's where a lot of these slides come from and the data came from. We see in the chat that people are interested in the slides. You'll certainly have them after, but we can also put the link to this write-up that we've done on the science if this part is really getting you excited. So we've kind of discussed why curiosity and disagreement are really important. And you may be thinking, wow, this is great. This is the thing that I want to kind of bring to my campus and instill in my students. It's also super freaking hard. This is maybe my favorite slide in the deck, because it would be so easy if we could just say, okay, now be curious and disagree with each other and, hang up the call and just go and do it. But it is really hard. And it may, if you're somebody who's really good at this, or this comes naturally to you, you may be feeling frustrated with folks for whom it's harder. And if you're someone for whom this is really challenging, you might be like, how the heck am I going to do this? So we're going to go through actually and understand some of the science behind why this is so hard, because hopefully it will make you feel a little bit better about yourself if you're having a hard time with this, or help you to be able to empathize with folks for whom this doesn't come as naturally. So there are four kind of main factors that make curious disagreement really hard. There are neurological, cognitive, social, and moral factors. So I'm going to go through them briefly now, and then we're going to talk about how to get past some of these challenges. So and if anybody's a neurology professor, let me know, because you may be able to expand on this for us. But from what we came to understand, the medial prefrontal cortex is a part of your brain that's basically the key resistor of new information. Its job is to reduce cognitive dissonance and to frame what inputs we receive on our day-to-day basis into an existing model of the world. That allows us to live efficiently, to be able to synthesize new information quickly and apply it to our everyday lives. And it's really a biological necessity, given how much, I mean, if you just look at the screen in front of you or the desk that you're sitting at, there's actually so much on it and so much going on. And so we need this ability to reduce everything into simple bits in order to just live in a complex world. But you can imagine that that makes things difficult when we're hearing perspectives we disagree with, meeting people that we've never met before. Some of these kind of natural processes can get in the way. So there's this idea of cognitive rigidity, which is what causes us to dismiss opposite viewpoints and resist these new perspectives in order to live more efficiently, but then again, getting in the way. So the example that I love to give is, did anybody, and I can't see everybody, but definitely shout if your answer to this question is yes. Did anybody, before they sat down in the chair they're sitting in right now, examine that chair to make sure that it had the structural integrity of a chair to be able to hold you up? Anybody do that? I'd be so surprised. Nobody's ever said yes to me in this case, because that would be insane. Like, everybody knows what a chair looks like, and if it looks enough like a chair, you're going to sit in it, because of this idea of heuristics or mental shortcuts, which enable us to look at things, have them be enough like something we're familiar with, and we just kind of move on with our lives. It's biologically necessary, but it's really unfortunate when we then see a person or hear a perspective and we're like, yep, I know what that is, and then we file it away in whatever box our our brain has created for that thing. So you can see how there is this beneficial process, but that gets in the way when we're hearing perspectives that suddenly don't fit into those expected boxes. There could be somebody who looks a certain way, but has a perspective that you wouldn't expect somebody who looks like them to have, or vice versa. And suddenly those heuristics get all confused. This also has the problem, you've probably heard the idea of confirmation bias, that we look for information that confirms what we already think, leading us to be in echo chambers. That's another one of these cognitive factors. And then looking at some of the social and moral factors. So one of them is this idea of satisficing. We're typically satisfied with good enough explanations for things. As soon as we feel like we have just kind of that tipping point of information, such that we're like, oh yes, that makes sense, that fits into the heuristic that I had for this perspective or this person, we're not always inclined to look for more information, especially if it's clashing with a value that we already have. There's also this concept, moving to the social, of social identity theory, that we develop a large part of who we are based on what groups we're a part of, who we spend time around, who we want to be around, who shares views with us. And that's really beneficial in terms of, you may have heard of kind of that pyramid of like, we need food and shelter and other like necessities for life. Some people say belonging actually fits as one of those categories, that we need to feel like we belong. And of course, we need to feel like we belong. And sometimes that desire for belonging and the social identity theory then gets in the way when we hear a perspective from somebody who maybe we think is in the group that we belong to, and suddenly that goes against what we think. That disrupts, again, that comfort, that belonging that we have. Some of you may have heard of the professor Alana Redstone. She wrote an amazing book called The Certainty Trap, where she talks about 3 fallacies that we can get trapped in when we're thinking about new perspectives. The settled question fallacy, where if we think that it's a settled question, that there isn't really, it's not controversial, there's one clear answer, that other people naturally think that as well. The fallacy of equal knowledge is a really tricky one. It's the idea that if somebody else had the information that I have, they would agree with me. So clearly the reason that they disagree is because they don't have all of the information. That's actually a fallacy, and it's a hard one to kind of think around, but it's a really important one. And then the fallacy of known intent, when somebody says something, we can think, oh, we know why they said that. We know what they meant when they said that. And really we don't, until we're able to be curious and ask them why. And one of the main reasons that this is so hard from a moral perspective is that there's anger when things make us mad, right? But there's another level of anger when there are perspectives that we hear that contradict who we think we are and the viewpoints that constitute who we are. And that's called moral outrage. That's like the seeing red. I can't do this anymore. I want to start yelling at this person and calling them names, or I need to leave the room. That's an emotional response. And that's one that's really hard to get by through intellect. So you can understand all of these factors, and maybe you're just too worked up. And that's when some of the emotional regulation techniques, like taking deep breaths, counting to 10, that type of thing can really come in and be helpful. So these are the neurological, cognitive, social, and moral factors that make the framework of curious disagreement that you've just all articulated so well why it's important. These factors get in the way of bringing that type of engagement into our lives, into our students' lives, into the culture of our campuses. And so it's important to be aware of these so that we don't just get mad when people can't do it or mad at ourselves. There are legitimate processes, some of them that are biologically advantageous, that make this type of work hard, and yet it's still critically important. So the next question that we want to be asking is, how can we get around some of these challenges and learn some skills in order to overcome them? So Jason, I'll pass it back to you.
Yes, thank you, Shira. And I will say, as much as maybe working against us in our brain, in our society, there is hope. It is not all gloom and doom as much as it may seem like it. There are a plentiful list of skills which enable us to be curious disagreeers. And one of the first things that we're going to explore in the skills section today is active listening. So I would love for you to either raise your hand in real life or using the sort of funny Zoom emoji feature if you have either been trained in active listening or have taught students or colleagues how to be an active listener before. So I'll give you all a moment to do that. Would love to see sort of the familiarity everyone has with active listening. Awesome. Great. So I'm seeing plenty of folks have engaged with active listening in some manner before, whether that's professional development, that's in your curriculum, or just something you're personally passionate about and think is important. And active listening has become more and more prevalent in our society and in our schools. And it's become prevalent because it is so important just in life. You need active listening to be a great communicator, to be a conflict mediator and negotiator, and also to be a curious disagreeer. And here at the Viewpoints Project, we view active listening through four main lenses. And that's going to be the goal, the body, the brain, and emotion. So what does active listening look like? And yeah, we can advance to the next slide, Shira. First off, the goal. You need to understand the goal of the conversation when you go into it. So imagine you're entering a room with a colleague or a friend or just a stranger, and you really want to have a deep, meaningful conversation to understand this person's perspective on an important issue to you or on a political topic. But let's say they come into the room really just wanting to debate with you. They want to try and prove to you that they're right and their viewpoint is superior. When you have a misalignment in goals around a conversation, active listening becomes incredibly difficult because you're seeing things from two very different perspectives and you can't understand why you're not gaining that alignment. So, the first step to being an active listener is actually establishing a shared conversational goal. Now, beyond the goal, there is also body language. A wealth of research has shown that body language is one of the most important ways that we communicate and also how we communicate, in fact, the majority of the information and emotions that we have. And I think many of us can recall times when we feel like someone we're talking to is truly engaged with and interested in what we're saying. And that's because we're subconsciously interpreting the physical signals that their body's giving off, their eye contact, their nodding, other forms of sort of physical affirmation that enables us to show encouragement even without interrupting the conversation. Beyond the body, of course, is the brain. You can demonstrate you're actively listening by taking notes and actually focusing on what your conversation partner is trying to explain. I'm sure many of you, and myself included, oftentimes try and think up a witty or important response to what someone is saying, or perhaps a question that we have, and really focus on crafting that because we all enjoy being eloquent in our speech, rather than actually trying to listen to what someone is saying and develop a deep understanding of where they're coming from. Even better, you can constantly check your own understanding to eliminate assumptions you may have. I mean, that's something we'll actually show you how to do in our next skills section on intentional questioning right after this. And last but not least, after the goal, the body, and the brain, of course, there are our emotions. as Shira just spoke to around a moral outrage, our emotions can oftentimes get in the way of seeking understanding and understanding others' perspectives and really moving through disagreement in an effective way. Of course, it's perfectly normal and natural to have emotional responses to others' viewpoints, especially around highly charged discussion topics. And we're not asking you to not be emotional or to completely set aside those emotions. What we do say is that you should acknowledge those emotions, recognize they're there, but also try your best to withhold any judgment or frustration you have, and really put first the desire to listen deeply and understand where someone else is coming from. And that's everything around active listening. And I'll pass it to Shira.
Alrighty, we're going to have you use the chat again. When you hear the term intentional questioning, which is the second tool that we're going to develop, what does intentional questioning look like to you? If somebody's asking you a question intentionally, how do you know? If you're asking a question intentionally, how do you know? What comes to mind for all of you? And we'll read them out from the chat. All right, we got open-ended questions, non-judgmental questions, non-threatening questions, questioning to learn. Penelope's reading our minds. That phrase is on our next slide. Acknowledging what's been said. Awesome. Oh, they're coming too fast for me to read all of them. Seeking clarification, confirming understanding, looking for facts. These are all fantastic. Starting with an end in mind, so you're trying to guide the conversation to a particular conclusion. Okay, that can sometimes be right when you're being really intentional about where the conversation is going. Then sometimes we are looking for a particular conclusion, whereas sometimes we're just trying to be open-minded. That's great. We can have both. Questions that demonstrate that we're listening, right? That's really important. If I'm telling you about my day and I say, I had a really difficult meeting, Jason was being so annoying on the call today, and someone's like, do you want ice cream after dinner? I'm like, okay, what? Like, were you even listening to anything that I just said? So great. So they're related. Using curiosity, awesome. All of these are really great. So we think about intentional questioning as kind of the flip side of or the other side of the coin of active listening. Sometimes we need to just fully listen before we ask questions. But then once we start asking questions, we want to know how to do it. And so we think of it in two categories: questioning to understand and questioning to learn more. So some of you raised this in the chat really nicely. The idea that maybe before we ask further questions, we want to clarify that we understood what they said. So my background is actually in small claims court mediation. We'll have cases like, you painted my house the wrong color, you kidnapped my dog. I actually had one of those last week. That was pretty wild. You have my car, Jack. No, actually, it's my car, Jack. And we spend a lot of time in the mediation room saying, okay, so just so that I'm really clear on the facts, is this your understanding of what happened? And then we'll lay it all back out for them. And they'll have the chance to correct us or to say, yes, that's exactly right. And we do that to make sure they 100% feel like we've listened to what they had to say, so that when we turn to the next person, they feel good about the fact that we're engaging with good faith. So we can do that in conversations with each other as well. Just to make sure I understand, when you're telling me that you think that I deserve a B plus on my paper, wouldn't it be cool if a student said this? You're telling me that I deserve this grade because of XYZ things. Is that right? Or you think that we should have an open border policy in this country because XYZ. Is that right? So we're not actually furthering the conversation. We're demonstrating that we're listening. We're getting a chance to clarify, and that will kind of create a more positive tenor in the conversation. And then we can move on to the questioning to learn more. Okay, so I hear that you think that open borders will be a problem because, or I hear that you think open borders is a good idea because it will create more equality. What does equality look like to you? Or why do you think the open borders will create more equality? That's the next level question. That might seem like the first level question, just a question. But if we can divide it into these two categories, that will set us up for much more success, especially when we're starting to go through those kind of subconscious processes that are getting in the way of curious disagreement. So we'll have a chance to practice these questions in a moment. Jason, did you also want me to talk about facilitation?
I'm happy to jump in here.
Okay,
And
perfect.
I
Yeah.
think that many of the folks on this call, all of our wonderful educators, are here not only because they want to learn how to disagree well themselves, but really because they want to be able to facilitate and scaffold a curious disagreement, whether it be in the classroom, in the curriculum, extracurricularly, whatever the case may be. So as we jump into facilitation here, I'd love for folks to sort of put a comment into the chat about a time that you facilitated some form of conflict mediation, perhaps civil discourse, a dialogue event, sort of things going on your campus or in your community where you've needed to facilitate.
Oh, sorry, Jason, I just skipped to the next slide and I realized we might have missed one.
All good.
So sorry, I really apologize. Let's just take a step back on this last point on intentional questioning, and then we're going to get to the facilitation, which is when we're thinking about these questions, right? We have questions to learn and questions to go further. We can also divide those questions into different categories. So we can have questions that expand the breadth of the conversation versus going really deeply into one area. We can have questions that look for knowledge versus that are looking for emotional response or empathy. We can have storytelling questions versus questions that point out different points of interest. And that relates back to the goals that Jason talked about as well. We can be really, really careful about what types of question that we're asking, even beyond to understand versus to go forward, so that we can kind of curate exactly the type of conversation that we've agreed that we're going to have. Okay, I'm so sorry for jumping in with that. But yes, let's go back, Jason. What were you saying about facilitation?
All good, Shira. Glad we were able to wrap up the intentional questioning piece. So yes, I was asking folks to put into the chat times that they facilitated some sort of conflict mediation, facilitated a dialogue with folks who are disagreeing, whether in personal life, campus, community, whatever the case may be. I'm seeing in the chat moms and other folks in their family constantly needing to facilitate conversation and dialogue and disagreement. And would love for some other folks to sort of jump into the chat with times that they've had to facilitate before.
Oh man, residence hall director. That's a good one.
That's a great one. I'm actually a resident advisor on my own campus at Vanderbilt and certainly resonate with constantly needing to facilitate roommate disagreements. And yeah, every day with your 4-year-old Madeline, that's great. So as we can see, I think many of us have at least some sort of level of experience with wanting to facilitate dialogue, facilitating conversations, and wanting to resolve conflict. But the question becomes, how can we do this really exceptionally well? And how can we do this consistently? What is a scaffold, a structure, a framework in order to facilitate things? And that is what we're going to jump into with the next slide. So through the Viewpoint Project's college fellowship, our consulting programs, and our other offerings, we have been able to develop basically a quick guide for great facilitation. So the first step in facilitating is recognizing what your role as a facilitator is within the conversation, and that is to be a steward. You are responsible for keeping the dialogue respectful, lively, on topic, and trying to seek a resolution. And in order to do this, there's a couple of quick tricks and tips that we have for you. First off, you should be modeling the behavior you want from your participants. This is something that is well founded in neurological research, where we all have these things in our brains called mirror neurons, where we're basically reflecting what we see people do. And so when you want to be a good facilitator, when you want to steward the conversation, make sure it is respectful and going well, you need to be modeling that behavior. And that includes being an active listener and an intentional questioner. That also means presenting new or challenging perspectives that are yet to be considered. At the beginning of the session, we were talking about why is curiosity or disagreement important. We mentioned, or many folks in the chat mentioned, that we all have different perspectives, lived experiences. And it's important to be able to consider those, bring those up in conversation, and really make sure that folks in a room, and especially students, have a deep understanding of the different viewpoints that may be around. Additionally, great stewards and facilitators can also uphold what we call engaged neutrality. So engaged neutrality means that you are not apathetic or dismissive about the topic being discussed, because oftentimes when folks say that they're neutral, it just means that they don't want to talk about it, they don't like talking about it, they quote unquote don't have any thoughts about a particular issue. But in reality, you should be engaged in your neutrality. So that means making sure that you are, again, putting forth all of the perspectives onto the table, uplifting others' voices and ideas, encouraging diversity of thought, challenging students and other folks in the room to bring their beliefs to the forefront, but at the same time making sure that your own personal bias does not seep into your participation in your role as a facilitator. That being said, we also recognize that facilitation can be difficult because engaging in dialogue can be quite scary. As we move into the next slide here, you'll sort of see some instances of why facilitation is difficult and why people may be nervous about participating in civil discourse programs or in approaching disagreement with their peers or with professors. And that's because as humans, we are afraid of being judged. We want to belong, we want to fit in, as we discussed earlier with those various neurological, social, and moral factors. And this is especially the case, as I'm sure many of you know, with students and other young people. We really want to make sure that we're part of a community, and there's just a lot of fears around approaching disagreement. Whether it's, oh, I'm afraid for my job, I'm afraid about the reputation that may sort of follow me, I'm afraid of the way people will think of me if I express what I actually believe in this conversation. So, as a facilitator, you need to acknowledge and affirm your participants' fears, but also explain that that fear doesn't need to be an obstacle. Yes, it's there, but it can be a building block. It can be what pushes us to be more curious, to seek better understanding of one another, and not to make assumptions. And to do that by expressing how important it is within the room to withhold judgment and to be an active listener and these other skills that we've discussed earlier in this presentation. Sort of along that same line, we also want to make sure that we're recognizing that we shouldn't assume things about others in conversation. Not only do you need to express this as a facilitator, but you also personally need to make sure that you aren't quote unquote reading people and assuming the way that they're going to be approaching a dialogue. So if you come in thinking that, oh, this person in this room has a bad intention or that they're not going to approach the conversation well, as a facilitator, you're inherently going to be biased against their perspective, shut down their voice, and generally not produce an effective dialogue. So it's really important that you, again, maintain that engaged neutrality, recognize and affirm those fears, be curious, and uphold all of the other skills that we've put forth today.
And if I
And
could just jump in, Jason, I'm really sorry to cut you off, but one
absolutely.
other beneficial part, I think, in thinking about this slide is that for some people, and some of you, I'm sure, like some of you are like, why are these, 20 something year olds telling me how to facilitate? I've been a classroom teacher for 30 years. I hear you. That makes sense. We're trying to give you kind of a student perspective on what we have heard from like professors that have been excellent facilitators for us. Is some of the inspiration around some of these tricks around facilitation, as well as kind of the mediation training. But some people may have been doing this forever and still feel like, I don't know how to do this. There's all this pressure from the administration. I don't want my students to post about me on social media. I don't want to become the next, case that fire posts about on social on their kind of annual report of the top schools in civil discourse. So one tip that we have, this when in doubt be curious, is it's really hard to get in trouble when you say, tell me more about, XYZ that somebody said. That can be kind of a foolproof way to continue a conversation where it's really hard for somebody to get mad at you. And two, if you feel like you are really skilled in this, that's awesome. And if you feel like, wow, some people are just so good at reading other people and reading the room, they always know the best thing to ask. I'm really nervous. I'm going to ask the wrong thing. I'm going to make someone upset. Keep in mind that reading people is also challenging. Kind of as Jason's saying, we don't want to be making assumptions. Sometimes reading people gets us into trouble, and so that's when we can kind of come back to that curiosity as facilitators. So just wanting to keep this in mind.
Absolutely. And if it's okay, before we jump to the next session, there was a really thoughtful comment from Layla Taylor here about how we can balance facilitation if you have a stake in the outcome of the conversation or if there's a power imbalance. I think that's a great question and something that we all grapple with. And I think we could do a whole webinar just on that. But I wanted to quickly add, and I think a lot of it depends on the context and the ideal outcomes of a conversation. And that is, again, sort of touching back on that idea of active listening and understanding what is the goal. As a facilitator, you need to know what is the goal. So, for instance, if you are in an advocacy or a leadership setting where you're bringing in other people's perspectives, but you also have a deep stake in what's going on, you very well may want to and probably need to at some point put your thumb on the scale. But that does not mean that you need to shut out others' perspectives or viewpoints. Facilitating well means creating room for other people's voices, for putting forth your own viewpoint, but recognizing that you don't have all the answers. You are not sort of the arbiter of all information and correctness. And so I think that those are some great strategies for facilitating in cases of, personal stakeholder. In terms of, the power imbalances, again, I think that's a whole webinar in and of itself, but a lot of it is really focusing on uplifting others' voices, again, affirming people's fears, creating space for each person. And there's sort of a lot of different like dialogue formats to do that, like narrative circles and these sorts of things, where we're really making sure everyone has space in the room to contribute. Shira, do you want to hop in with any other comments on this?
Yeah, and I mean, we're doing really well on time, so we may actually have some time at the end to do some question and answer. We're also about to ask you to share some tips with each other, so I'm really curious to hear how other folks have kind of handled these questions. The last thing I would say is like, if there's a power imbalance and you're the person who is perceived to have more power, you can do a lot really quickly by saying, before we begin this conversation, I just want to acknowledge the power imbalance, right? I'm the professor and you are the student, and therefore, I don't know, I have control over your grades. I get to decide X, Y, Z, and I recognize that. And here's why, this conversation still feels important, or here's what power you have, or here are the ways that I'm committed to making sure this is a conversation on equal footing. If I had to like take one takeaway from this entire webinar, it might just be that clear communication is always the most important thing. So if you can be upfront about something like the goal of the conversation, or the way that you want to ask the question, or the power imbalance that's coming up, even if that feels really awkward, the more you can be like, okay, elephant in the room, like this is what's happening for me, the more successful that conversation is going to be. But I really want to come back to this. Actually, maybe right in the next slide here, Jason, I think we were going to ask folks facilitation techniques that have worked well for them. And certainly if it's related to this question of bias or power imbalance, we'd love to hear. So did we want to ask people to raise their hands if anybody wanted to share out loud?
Yeah, absolutely. I think folks, please put in the chat facilitation techniques that have worked well for you, but also we'd love to have one or two volunteers come off of mute and share a facilitation technique that they think would be great for the room. And okay, I'm seeing here John Suarez, you popped up on my screen first. So please feel free to come off of mute and share your thoughts.
Thank you for this. This is wonderful. I've already got 2 pages worth of notes, so I'm looking forward to the screen. I have an example of a case that reflects that power imbalance. This is some years ago. I was teaching an academic writing course, and there was a student who disagreed with her grade. So we had a calm conversation, and we just couldn't get anywhere. So I offered to bring in a different writing professor to take a look at her paper. And I said, if that professor gives you a lower grade, we'll go with my grade. If he gives you a higher grade, we'll go with his grade. She got the higher grade. But it worked out, and we had a good working relationship, she and I, through the rest of the semester.
Amazing. So thinking about who else can you bring into the room when you're at an impasse is a really great facilitation tool. Thank you so much for that, John. Rebecca?
Hi, sorry, I'm not in a place where I can have my camera on,
Don't
but I
worry.
wanted to share two things. One is I teach like a civic engagement class, and so I always start off by like explaining to our students that our class is going to be conversation based, and that like while like I am the expert in my own experience, each of them like, and that is something that kind of right, like the teacher is the expert generally is kind of how we have things set up in an academic setting. So I like to set the scene by explaining that, like, while I'm an expert, it is just in my experience, and each of them are experts in their own experience. And so everyone's voice is kind of valid. And then the second part about curiosity is, and this is not like a quote from me, it was from a course that I sat in on that says that, like, basically people can be both curious and judgmental, but never at the same time. And so those are kind of two ways that I frame a class that is really based in discourse.
Love it. Amazing. And Sanda also says having community agreements is a good one. Chantel Carter asking the question, help me understand, lowers defenses. Absolutely. Having an early understanding of who's going to be in the room, right? The more you can prepare for a facilitation, all of these are really fantastic techniques. And we actually at the Viewpoints Project, we have a guide to curious disagreement that we've created for professors that can serve as a kind of when you hand out the syllabus, like at least in my school, like we would receive a syllabus on the first day of class and go over what the syllabus is going to entail. This is meant to be a supplement to that, with a section for professors and for students about what the types of conversations are going to entail, kind of what, not necessarily community norms, but helping people understand the way that this classroom is going to be set up in a way that fosters curious disagreement. So if folks are interested in receiving a copy of that, definitely send us an email after. There'll be some information about follow-up at the end of the presentation, but happy to share that as a resource if folks if that would be helpful for folks. Oops, I did not mean to close that. Okay, well, that's all right. All right, we are now on the scene section, and I'm trying to bring the chat back because I've just lost it for myself. There we go, perfect. And so this is where it gets really fun. So if you're falling asleep, it's time to wake up because it's about to get really exciting. We want you to start thinking in your head. Jason and I are going to model this first, and then we're going to call on you guys to model it yourselves. We want to think about hot takes. So some hot takes that we've received from our fellows this year in the fellowship. One person said she really likes to have ravioli with bananas, like in the same plate, like on a fork. So that was her hot take. Another person's hot take was that you should never have fruit that's cooked. Like everything has its own state. So like apples, you eat off a tree. You don't cook it in a pie. That's the level of hot take we're going for. Okay, we're not going for your take on the Middle East conflict. We're not going on your take on how to solve political polarization in America. That's the level we're going for. So we're going to practice some of these active listening and intentional questioning skills, and we're going to do it live, so that you as the audience will have a chance to listen in for these skills, and then you'll have a chance to say, I heard this, it was really awesome, here are some things that could have been included. So Jason and I will model, and then we're going to ask you to volunteer. So start thinking about your hot takes. If you want to put them in the chat for everyone to see, definitely go for it, and we can have somebody say, this person has this hot take, I'm curious to learn more about it. Would you be willing to share? And then we can have some group engagement together. So start thinking about your hot takes. And Jason, in the meantime, do you have one that you want to do with me, or do you want me to jump in with a hot take?
I can go ahead and start, and this actually
Okay.
came up in a conversation with a colleague the other day, and I think is a pretty good hot take,
All
which
right.
is that you should not bring your personal pets to indoor public spaces like cafes, grocery stores, or the office. I think that lots of people would disagree with me on this, so curious, Shira, what do you think of my hot take?
Okay. So let me just clarify. So it's like if you were going to a store or to a coffee shop, you should leave your pet at home or with a sitter, and that you could take your dog like to a park or on a walk, but as soon as where you're going is inside, the pet should stay at home. Is that right?
Yes, I would say that's correct. Of course, with the caveat of, if it's a service animal or other sort
Sure.
of thing where you need the pet to go out. But I think generally, yes, pets should be left at home unless you're going to a pet place like a park.
Okay. So, did you have some sort of experience? Like, did you have a dog like jump on you in a store or something that led you to this hot take, or kind of where did you come up with this perspective?
Well, I guess two things. One, I would say generally, I'm personally not the biggest fan of animals, and I don't have any pets of my own, so perhaps that drives a little bit of my feelings around this. But I also feel that pets are sort of oftentimes disruptive to public spaces, both in terms of just noise and bodily functions, right? Like sort of things that are part of being an animal. And in my mind, indoor spaces designed for people should not sort of have these pets interfere, I guess.
Cool. Okay, interesting. So there's something about preserving like the function of the space that you
Mhm.
feel like pets can disrupt. So what would you suggest to folks who aren't able to leave their pet or at home? Um, does your hot take also come with any sort of solution, or are you more focused now on the problem and want to think about the solution at a different point?
Well, I guess maybe part of my feeling on this hot take is I really don't see a reason why you can't just leave your pet at home. Like, I think for 99% of animals, it's totally fine to have them be inside your home if you're out for an hour or even for the day at the office. I don't know, perhaps I think my perspective maybe is limited by not having pets in this regard, but please, I would love some more information and knowledge on this.
Okay, awesome. Let me ask you one more question, Jason, and then we want to hear from the audience. Um, w- let's see. Let me actually think for a second about something that you said. You talked about pets being disruptive to a space, and I guess I'm curious, what is the value of non-disruptive space for you? Like when it seems like there's something that is disrupted by the pet, and that makes me think that you place some sort of value on non-disruptive places, and I'm wondering if you can tell me a little more what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is to me, most places have a purpose, right? Like there is an environment specifically curated for you or for the people to accomplish something. So if you're in the office, that is you want to accomplish your work. If you're in the grocery store, you're there to buy groceries. And to me, having pets in that space oftentimes can disrupt that purpose and make it more difficult to accomplish that goal. I mean, I think the office is perhaps the easy and the obvious answer, right? But like me, if there's a barking animal in the background, that is not very, conducive to my own working environment.
Sure. Amazing. Okay, scene. Boop. And scene. Thank you, Jason, for your hot take. I actually happen to agree with you on that take. But I also, I mean, I'm very curious to hear from Melissa, who clearly feels very strongly. But before we do that, and I'm seeing really great responses in the chat. Does anyone want to unmute and share something that you feel that you noticed? It could be something you put in the chat that you noticed about this conversation that drew on those active listening skills or those intentional questioning skills.
Please, you can raise your hand, come off mute, add things in the chat. Love some engagement or thoughts on this.
Nolan, please.
Well, I have a dog that I bring to various places, and I wouldn't even begin to hear him because immediately I was like, forget him, you know. And
Him
that's
being Jason.
yes,
Yes.
Jason. So and I know that's part of why we're having this discussion, but my immediate reaction was I wasn't going to hear what he had to say. My dog and I, and he's a little dog, but we're going to run right over him.
So then when I started asking these questions, is there something that you heard that made you think, okay, actually, I'm going to listen to the rest of this conversation? Because you could have left the Zoom.
Well, I was going to leave the Zoom, but guys, Jason's doing too well otherwise. That you just, just always take a moment before you say anything, whatever, just take a moment. But I
Right.
was really surprised. We're just doing a Zoom and it was a fake thing, but my immediate emotional reaction was, oh,
Yeah.
and we're talking about something fake, never mind something real per se. Unless it's real, Jason, we should talk.
Thankfully, it is not something that I deeply value or I'm actively advocating for, but certainly resonate with you, Nolan, and the importance of taking a breath, taking a step back, again, acknowledging and affirming, but then sort of continuing on in the conversation, recognizing that perhaps I can listen. And I think that definitely plugs into what we discussed earlier about withholding judgment, about sort of the importance of, acknowledging the emotions, but not letting them be an obstacle. And I'm glad to hear that you're not going to leave the Zoom. Shira, do we want to have one more person share out? Do we want to move into the next section?
Layla seems to have raised her hand. I want to highlight in the chat some of the things that have been said, and then maybe we'll get to Layla and then go into the breakout rooms. But I love that some of you guys were jumping in with seeing solutions, acknowledging concerns that add value, asking empathy related questions. I tried to think when I was talking to Jason about kind of the underlying. So in mediation, we talk about interests and positions. Positions are, I don't think dogs should be allowed in public spaces. And interests are, I want a disruption-free space. I don't want to hear the noise. I want it to be this specific environment. The interests are what the underlying values, basically. So one thing I was trying to do that hopefully you saw was to get at some of those underlying values. And then also there was a moment where I was like, actually, let me think for a second. And then I just sat in awkward silence. And I felt awkward when I did that, but that allowed me to think a little bit more clearly and frame a question in a more helpful way than I was originally going to ask it. So leaning into that discomfort can be really helpful as well. Layla, how about you?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for this great exercise. I just wanted to name that Yeah, it was really powerful to kind of witness you and observe you in the kind of pauses that you took, the deliberateness that you took to formulate your questions. And it made me think a lot because I mean, clearly for me, there was immediate emotional response, you know, and wanting to go right to my own perspective, right? Like in my own, like to counter or to maybe if I wasn't going to counter, then maybe to solve. And you added space, right? You know, for just kind of conversation around the issue versus solving the problem, which I really appreciated. But also, that I think what I'm really learning is that this process of being able to go through and sit with discomfort. I mean, this takes a lot of personal reflection. Um, yeah, and it makes me feel like, you know, I mean, you're an experienced at doing this, but I think that it's kind of like I imagine there would be baby steps, you know, to kind of getting to even sitting with this level of conversation before you can successfully, you know, hold and facilitate this conversation, you know, in a way that actually does, you know, encourage curiosity that doesn't, you know. So I'm just thinking about the level of personal reflection that it takes to have a conversation like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like one thing that we try and encourage people is like you're not going to overnight become, you know, the expert on curious disagreement, but can you take one moment a day to practice? It's a skill, right? So can you take a moment during the day to practice? Maybe your spouse comes home or your significant other comes home and, you know, they're somebody that you love and it doesn't feel super risky. Like, can you practice asking them really curious questions? And see how they respond and kind of get used to it in a comfortable environment. You know, you can do this anytime, any place. It doesn't require any materials or any equipment. It's not very high stakes either. So we encourage people to do it as like a daily practice. Can you do it once in a conversation? Can you do it in a different setting after you've gotten comfortable with that one setting and kind of going from there? So thank you very much for that reflection, Layla. With about 20 minutes left or so, we want to put you guys into breakout rooms to get the chance to practice in small groups. And then please come back, and it's only going to be 6 minutes, so I know you can do it. Please come back after the breakout session and we'll do a reflection all together. So I'll preview it right now and then we'll send you out. So, okay, we just did this reflection. I just didn't switch the slide. So this is going to be the scenario that you're going to take on when you're in the breakout room. And those of you that have to go, no worries at all. We'll send you a follow-up email. But imagine you're leading a seminar and a student objects. Is that what it says? I can't read my slide. Yeah, objects to the inclusion of a text in the seminar because of the author's reputation. Another student disagrees, saying the text is really important, even if she doesn't agree with what the author did. You facilitate a conversation between the disagreeing students. So maybe you've even had a situation like this in your professional career. So we're going to have you go into breakout rooms and one of you is going to start as the teacher and then two of you are going to play the students. And then every 2 minutes you're going to switch. So each person gets a chance to play the teacher and each person gets the chance to play the student. And then after these 6 minutes, we're going to come back and reflect on how that felt. And then we'll tell you a little bit more about how you can bring some of these tools to campus. So I think Laura is going to make those breakout groups. If you, as it seems like a bunch of folks are dropping off, what we might do if you are placed into a room and somebody leaves, just send us a message and we'll try and replace you. And welcome back to the recording as well. So I want to take 3 to 5 minutes to reflect and 3 to 5 minutes to wrap up. So curious to hear from you and feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in. There's not so many of us anymore. What was it like applying these skills to a realistic scenario? Or do you have any takeaways for bringing this back to your campus? What did this activity bring up for you?
I was sort of surprised at how tricky it was for us without having a specific person or text or whatever to object to or to defend. And I think it just brought home to me how, we said at one point, so are we talking about Nietzsche? Or are we talking about Huck Finn? and it just brought home how specific the context of any conversation is to that situation. And I guess, also going back to what you said about reading people, like I guess the flip side of that is you could assume that if someone, objected to one thing that you knew why.
Sure.
But it was useful to think about how hard it was to move forward without being able to kind of seize on something specific someone said to ask that next question.
Right. Alina, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, and really, I just wanted to highlight my excellent partner in the breakout room. So my reaction was, oh, this is challenging. And I think especially challenging because this example, as so many of these conversations, tie into identities and deeply personal and sometimes traumatic experiences. So I was like, how do you even address this? And I think Christine, my partner, did multiple things very thoughtfully and well. But I think one really savvy move was thinking about what needs to happen in the conversation here and now, and what might be a longer process. So after a couple of questions, she kind of suggested, well, like, I think you might have, as a student with particular identities, might have a particularly valuable perspective to this. How, like, do you think it would be worth doing some research, or like writing a paper on this topic? The example we were running with was J.K. Rowling and trans gender people. So like, hey, how about you write a paper about this so the class can learn from your perspectives? And I think that was a really great way of opening up space and time for voices without feeling like you have to somehow figure and hash all of this out in the here and now, which can be really difficult. So kudos to Christine.
Awesome. Thank you. Sunshine?
I just wanted to note that it became clear that at least my kind of default was to jump into the questioning to learn more, rather than the questioning to understand. So we talked about that too, about how if you're trying to find a solution, it is easy to get to the questioning to learn more, and perhaps harder to take that minute to hold back, and show that you're trying to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a question, right? It's like back to the goal of the conversation. Is the goal to come to some sort of resolution? Is the goal to just learn more about what the other people are thinking? Like sometimes if you're the professor and you decide, I get to make the unilateral decision of whether or not I include this in my curriculum. So what I want to do is just learn from the students what they're feeling. And I'm either going to decide based on that or not, depending on how I'm feeling. Then that's very different than, okay, at the end of the day, the students are going to vote on whether or not we're going to include this text, and therefore you're going to facilitate a very different conversation. So that's really, really insightful. Thank you for that. Monica, did you have something?
Yeah, I found it difficult not to ask a leading question to bring the student over to my point of view that this was necessary or whatever. I need to remind myself, is what I'm realizing, is like, it's just pausing and taking more time for the student to or the other person with a different perspective to explain it and say, help me understand why that is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Anybody else? Something that you're thinking about how to bring these skills back to your campus after the webinar?
Feel free to add into the chat as well, if that works better for you.
John, yes, please.
Hi, it was our conversation with Christina and Ron was really interesting for a number of reasons, not the least of which was because we realized, we're not these monoliths. The folks in a room can be leaning in the same political direction, but when you get down to the nitty-gritty, some of the granular issues, some of those details, we are not on the same page.
Yeah.
And so the process can help uncover that.
Absolutely. Right. We can assume that we disagree with someone. That's pretty common. But sometimes we assume we agree, and we do mostly. But then there are other aspects of the same conversation that we might not agree. Awesome. Thank you. All right, and good. So Sunshine wants to bring some of these examples into her campus. We love to see that and would love to talk more about bringing this back to campus. So we want to just tell you a little bit more about the fellowship that we run that can help bring some of this framework of curious disagreement back to your campus. So the fellowship is called the Viewpoints Fellowship, and the goal is to create a lasting culture of curious disagreement on college campuses. It's a program that's run by students for students. We hire college students who have experience in civil discourse and curious disagreement to run a year-long fellowship for other college students on different campuses. So we partner with the campus, and that allows fellows from that campus to apply. So you can't just apply if you're a college student in the country. We would need to partner with you as a campus, and then that opens up the opportunity. And the fellow candidates are folks who are student organizational leaders. And the reason for that is because we want them to think about what is a goal they have for their student organization, and how can a framework of curious disagreement help them reach that goal? Because one of the biggest challenges we've seen on college campuses is there are the people who are super bought into civil discourse, and then there's the people who aren't. And these people, the people who are bought in, come to all the trainings, and then these people don't. And suddenly you're preaching to the choir, or you're preaching to nobody at all. So how can we get to the students who aren't, fundamentally and ideologically opposed, but who may not otherwise be, gung-ho about this type of engagement? And the way we want to do that is by aligning interests. So the head of the newspaper signs up because they want to improve the readership of their newspaper and to have more different perspectives in their paper. And then they go through this curriculum. There's a May campus day, there's a summer book club, there's a 3-day conference in person where students from across the country will come together and learn some of these skills that we've learned today together, and many, many more. And then in the fall, they'll think about, okay, I want to improve the readership in my newspaper. This framework of intentional questioning could really help us become better reporters. Let me run a workshop for my peers about intentional questioning to become better reporters. And oh, by the way, they can use these skills in all sorts of other contexts on campus as well. And so they're creating a club-specific way to bring a culture of curiosity toward disagreement into the organizations that they run. They're trusted leaders. They're doing something with their peers that their peers already want to be doing. And then in the spring, the group of fellows on that one campus creates a capstone project to introduce these skills more broadly to the campus. So we're right now looking for folks to join the 2026-2027 cohort. You can scan this QR code for more information. You can visit our website. You can send us an email. There'll be some information in a follow-up email as well, but we didn't want to leave you without this opportunity to take the hour of webinar that you've just done and really think about an expansive way to bring it to a population of folks on your campus who may not otherwise have gotten involved. So I think with that, we're just about out of time. Jason, did you have anything to conclude with?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking the time out of your day and out of your lunch hour to attend this webinar, for your interest and for your engagement, and also for hopefully enjoying the breakout and scene sessions. We really appreciate all of you, and we'll be reaching out to you soon. So thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm seeing some questions in the chat that we don't have time to answer, so send us an email and we'd love to get back to you. And otherwise, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Yes, I want to thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Shira and Jason and the Viewpoints Project for being here. This was an amazing, amazing webinar. You will see a follow-up email later this week with the slides, some additional resources, and the recording. Thank you from Campus Compact, and we look forward to our next professional development opportunity. Have a great day, everyone.